Hello, my name is Jayann Sepich, and I'm so very honored to have been invited to speak today to the Asian Forensic Science Network. I'm happy to be here to share my story, and especially to talk about DNA databases and how when they are fully funded and implemented, they're incredibly powerful. And they have the power to solve crimes, prevent crimes, save lives, and prevent so many people, victims and their families, pain and trauma. I understand that there are those of you listening today representing countries that have successful and working DNA databases, and that includes Singapore, which is known as the gold standard of DNA databases, and also China, which has the largest database, and Japan and South Korea, which have mature databases of the most serious crimes. I also understand that there are some of your countries that are developing DNA databases, including Malaysia, that has very strong DNA database legislation, but needs more funding and implementation, and also those that are working on legislation, including Thailand, India, Indonesia, and the Philippines. And good legislation is so important. It is one of the foundations of a successful DNA database, but it's not enough. There also has to be funding, and then it has to be implemented. I'm so grateful for those of you who have working and successful DNA databases in your country, and I'm also grateful for those of you who are developing DNA databases. I know it's a huge undertaking. It's not an easy job. It certainly doesn't happen quickly. There's so much to be done. There's the mechanics of setting the database up. There's passing good legislation, then getting adequate funding and having full implementation. But I know, I have seen what happens when a DNA database becomes working. The rewards are immense. Why are DNA databases so important to me? Well, this is my story that I would like to share with you. A little over 18 years ago, in August of 2003, I was living in my hometown, very small town in rural New Mexico in the United States. It's quiet, it's quaint, it's picturesque, and nothing really happens here. At that time, I had been with my husband for 32 years. We had 3 incredible children. Our oldest, Katie, had graduated in May from New Mexico State University with a degree in marketing and had started working 2 weeks earlier on her Master's of Business Administration. Our son AJ had graduated from high school and had just started at the University of New Mexico studying foreign languages. And our youngest daughter, Caroline, was a happy, healthy 4th grader who loved science in school. But it is Katie, our oldest, that brings me here today. You can tell by looking at her that she was a beautiful young woman, but she was so much more than that. She entered the world bright-eyed and feisty, and that never changed. From the moment she came into the world, she had her father wrapped around her little finger, and all of our friends and the rest of our family adored her. She was creative, she was inventive, she loved make-believe, she was always just happy. She was also fearless. There was literally nothing she was afraid to try. She was intelligent, she was bright. She was a 5-time state champion for the Odyssey of the Mind Championships in New Mexico, and she went 4 times to the World Championships for Odyssey of the Mind. Katie was determined. She always had a plan. We used to say you could either help Katie get what she wanted or just get out of her way. But that didn't mean she wasn't a lot of fun. Our house was always filled with her friends and the sound of their laughter. Katie was the kind of daughter everyone wants to have. Loving, intelligent, kind, just a wonderful, vivacious young woman. The thing that I remember most about Katie is how hard she loved. She loved her brother with all her heart. They were best friends. She adored her baby sister, and she was very close to her parents. Katie and I talked every day, sometimes several times a day. Sunday, August 31st arrived. Now that was the Sunday of a holiday weekend in the United States. and we were getting ready to have all our friends over for a backyard party. We had a house full of out-of-town friends, and things were wonderful. Our lives were wonderful. But then the phone rang at 2:15 in the afternoon, and our lives were shattered with just 6 words. Have you talked to Katie today? It was Tracy, Katie's roommate, and she was calling to say that the night before, after Katie had worked a full shift at the Mexican restaurant where she was a server, that they had gone to a friend's house. Katie had gotten into an argument with her boyfriend and had just gotten furious, and she just decided she wanted to go home. So she left to walk 5 blocks home in a very safe neighborhood, but she left without her house keys, without her purse, without her phone, and no one had seen her since. I told Tracy that surely she was just at another friend's house, and Tracy said, no, I've called all of her friends. I've even called the hospitals to see if she was in an accident, and no one has seen her. She's literally vanished without a trace. We told Tracy to call and make a missing persons report with the local law enforcement, and her dad, my husband Dave, and Dave's best friend got in our car and started over to Las Cruces, which is a town about 4 hours away where she was going to college. Well, when they got there, they were met at Katie's house with a chaplain, a victim's advocate, and the county sheriff. You see, when Tracy made that call to say that Katie was missing, the authorities immediately knew that the body that had been found in the desert by hikers that morning was most probably Katie. So Dave had to go to the morgue and identify his daughter. He later told me that when they pulled back that sheet and he saw her face, bruised, contorted in pain, he fell to his knees and asked God to take him too. He didn't want to go on. No father should ever go through that. No parent should. Our precious Katie had been very brutally raped. She had been sodomized. She had been beaten, strangled to death, her body dumped in the desert and set on fire. Our joyous, vivacious Katie was dead. 18 years later, I still don't have the words to describe the pain. I remember being plunged into a pit so deep, so black, so hopeless, I thought there would never be light again. We knew at that point the only thing we could do for Katie was give her a beautiful funeral, and we did. Over 1,200 people crowded into our little tiny church to say goodbye to Katie. And it turned into a celebration of her life as person after person came forward to talk about what Katie had meant to them, the fun things that they did. But the pain was unbearable. When we took her to the cemetery, I just kept thinking, how can I leave her here? How can I go on? But our family, about a week later, gathered under a beautiful starry New Mexico sky, and we pledged that we would go on, that we would find joy in living again, that we would not let this monster who took Katie from us destroy our lives. But we needed answers. We needed to know who had killed her and why, and most importantly, we needed to stop him so he couldn't do it again. There were literally very few clues. But Katie had fought hard for her life, and underneath her fingernails was the skin and the blood of the man that had killed her. And the person that was in charge of her investigation told us that they could extract a full DNA profile from that skin and blood under her fingernails, and that they would put it into CODIS, the National Forensic DNA Database in the United States. It's been operating in the United States since 1998. Matching crime scene evidence to offenders' DNA profiles. And CODIS has identified thousands of criminals and brought them to justice. I only knew about CODIS from television shows like CSI and Law and Order. But the captain in charge of her investigation went on to tell me that once a week at least, the crime scene evidence would be cross-referenced with offender DNA to look for a match. This gave us such bright hope. We knew we had the identity of Katie's killer. We just had to match it to a name. That was in 2003, and in most states, it was only taken upon conviction for most felonies. So I knew we had a good chance we would find Katie's killer. But to increase those chances, our family decided to make it our mission to expand the DNA database in our home state and beyond. So I started doing research. I wanted to know everything that I could know. What is this CODIS system? How does it work? What can it do? What can it not do? I knew that we had to change laws because lives needed to be saved and pain needed to be prevented so that fathers wouldn't have to identify their daughters in a morgue, so that mothers wouldn't have to leave their daughters in a cemetery to be buried, so that brothers and sisters wouldn't lose their best friend. But I found out there was opposition to DNA databases, which surprised me, and I thought, why? And I was told it was an invasion of privacy, because isn't DNA the blueprint of everything about us? So I did more research, and I talked to CODIS administrators, and I talked to forensic scientists, and I found out that our DNA is not private. We leave it everywhere we go. And furthermore, CODIS is not a genetic or a medical database. And our DNA, our actual DNA, doesn't go into that database. A DNA profile does, and that's a very different thing. The human genome has over 3 billion markers or base pairs, and only 20 of those go into CODIS. And those 20 markers have no potential to disclose any medical diagnostic information or physical characteristics. They were chosen by forensic scientists because they're non-coding. And DNA in the database can be used only for criminal identification. It has no potential to reveal any genetic or medical information. Now, we knew how successful the science of DNA can be, so we decided to do everything we could to see DNA used to its utmost potential, so that criminals are identified, taken off the streets sooner, where they can do no more harm. And even as important as that, when the real criminal is identified, innocent persons will not be wrongfully accused, tried, convicted, or incarcerated. So much good to be done. So we went to our state representative and asked him to introduce a bill in New Mexico that would expand the DNA database. And now, all these years later, 31 states have expanded their DNA database in the United States. And in a lot of states, it's known as Katie's Law. Our work in the United States has centered on expanding DNA databases to include arrestee DNA testing. But we know that every step forward in creating and expanding DNA databases means that more crimes will be solved, more lives saved, and even more crimes will be prevented. The countries represented here today have varying laws and DNA databases. I know that you're in different stages of developing your DNA databases, but it's important to understand the reality of what expanding DNA databases can truly mean in people's lives. Our Katie was ripped away from us in a moment, in an instant. We needed answers. How could it be? One moment she was here, the next moment she was gone. For over 3 long years, we would wake up and say, is this the day we'll get answers? Then finally on December 18th, 2006, we got the phone call. We have a match. Katie had been murdered in August of 2003. And in November of 2003, the man that murdered her was arrested for an unrelated burglary, but we didn't have a law that would allow his DNA to be taken. It was 3 years later, after he was convicted of an unrelated burglary and incarcerated, that they got his DNA, and we got that match. As soon as they got that match, it was used for an investigative lead, and they did an intensive investigation. And within 1 week, they found Katie's ring in his truck. They found that the tire tracks that were found by her body matched the tires on his truck, and this man confessed. On December 26, 2006, Gabriel Avila was formally charged with the rape, kidnapping, and murder of our daughter Katie, which ironically would have been her 26th birthday. And on May 3, 2007, he was sentenced to 69 years with no possibility of parole. Over 3 years of investigation, Avila had never been a person of interest. No one had even heard his name. Without DNA, he would have never faced justice. That's the incredible power of DNA and DNA databases. We learned that everyone deals with grief in a different way, but we learned that justice does bring healing. When Gabriel Avila was sentenced, we realized that having that justice did help us heal. So we established DNA Saves, which is a nonprofit organization, because we learned the larger the databases are, the more powerful they become. And we are seeing incredible results. In the United States, almost 575,000 matches have been made between crime scene evidence and offender profiles, resulting in over 561,000 investigations aided. That means 561,000 crime victims have been given hope for justice and healing. In California, the DNA database is averaging over 10 matches every day. 300 victims every month have hope for resolution and justice. Violent criminals are being taken off the streets before they can perpetrate more crimes. We see news stories every day about cases solved by DNA database matches. One that particularly strikes me is in Colorado, where there was a serial rapist. They knew it was a serial rapist because the crime scene evidence between all the different rapes matched one person. But they didn't have a match for an offender in the database. Then one day, a man was arrested for assault. He had been arguing with an older gentleman who was straddling a bicycle, and he pushed him, and the older gentleman fell down and broke his hip. This man's name was William Costello, and he was an outstanding citizen in the community. They were in the process of plea bargaining that assault down to a misdemeanor, and if we hadn't expanded the database to include arrestee DNA, his cheek would never have been swabbed, but it was, and it matched, and William Costello was the serial rapist. A lot of people think DNA databases are too expensive, but quite the opposite is true. It saves money. There was a study done at a prestigious university in the United States, the University of Virginia, that found that for every cheek swab, which in the United States costs an average of $30, there's a savings of $27,000. They also found in this study that an expanded DNA database results in a decrease of 3.2% murders, 6.6% rapes, 2.9% of aggravated assaults, and 5.4% of vehicle thefts. Now, those sound like small percentages, but when you look at the crime statistics in the United States, what that means is that it would prevent 553 murders, 8,960 rapes, 25,514 aggravated assaults, and 41,750 motor vehicle thefts per year. It's so wonderful that many of your countries are using DNA databases to harness the tremendous power found in the science of DNA. The more that DNA databases are expanded, you will find in the months and years to come investigative leads that never would have been found otherwise, crimes that will be solved that would not have been solved. It's impossible to fully express the incredible good that will come from this. So I'm going to make it very personal. I'd like for each one of you to close your eyes. And in your mind, I would like you to think of someone that means the world to you, that brings you great joy. And I want to think how you would feel if you got that phone call that not only were they gone where they did, but they were a victim of a horrible, violent, brutal crime. Think how you would feel. It's hard to even imagine. Now allow yourselves to feel the relief when you realize that the DNA database absolutely could save your loved one. As the database grows, more crimes are solved, more lives are saved. We know of murder victims that could have been saved in the United States with more expanded DNA databases. In Nevada, a beautiful young woman named Breonna Dennison would have been saved because the man that murdered her had committed crimes prior to murdering her, and there was crime scene evidence in the database, but it hadn't been expanded so that he could be included when he was arrested for a crime. Morgan Harrington and Hannah Graham in the state of Virginia in the United States would still be alive with an expanded DNA database. Using the power of DNA databases should be done sooner rather than later, before another rape or murder is needlessly committed, but before another life is needlessly lost. You know, I am very fortunate. I have so many pictures of my daughter, Katie. She was our oldest, and we just had so many pictures of her. One of my friends was talking to me, and she said, Jayann, of all those pictures, which one is your favorite? And I thought about it, and I said, my favorite pictures are the ones that will never be taken, the ones that exist only in my mind. Without DNA, Katie's murder would never have been solved. The DNA database brought our family peace, resolution, and justice. Victims deserve justice sooner rather than later. Future crimes that can be prevented, saving so much pain. Every year on Katie's birthday, we visit her grave, and I think about those pictures that I'll never have. The one where she's getting her master's degree, the one where she's on her daddy's arm walking down the aisle to meet her groom to be married, the one where she's holding her first child. Oh, I would so choose to have Katie back, but we don't get to choose. We only get to choose how to move forward. And our family has been blessed to be able to move forward, working on things that can help other families have their daughters and have all of those pictures. I want to say congratulations and thank you to all of you who are working so diligently to establish and expand DNA databases. But there is still more to be done to bring justice, bring victims of crime justice and resolution they need so desperately, and to prevent horrific crimes from happening in the first place. The life that is saved could absolutely be someone you love. Thank you.